Hello folks, and welcome back to the start of a new Scratch build. This is Project Ensis, and this is the one that I teased a couple weeks ago that's going to be run alongside AORUS. Now, much in the same vein as our AORUS KS build from last year, Gigabyte and Intel got in touch wanting a stupendously special system with which to show off some of their flagship hardware, and to that extent they have really sent over some rather special stuff that should be pretty exciting to work with. And not only that, because this is a Scratch build, we get to do something a little bit off the wall and different. And that's always my favorite, because the last time was a case mod, which means you're always hemmed in a little bit by the creativity of the original case. But I love doing things from scratch, as you've no doubt seen from AORUS. And speaking of which, because that was being run alongside this one, I can use some of the techniques that I picked up on that one in here, and also vice versa, because obviously I'll have to develop new things for this project that I can then potentially use in that one. And that's one of the cool things about having these two running side by side. Now, before we get into the meat of the planning of this build, let's go over the components, because not only are they crucial to the theme of the build, but they're pretty exciting, especially this one over here, which is the Z490 Waterforce Xtreme. This is a beast of a motherboard, and when I mean it, I mean really, it's a beast. Aside from being huge, it weighs so much. This thing is easily sort of 7-8 pounds or something. You pick it up and it has that proper heft to it, and that's largely from the result of having a full-on monoblock on the front, much like the Z490 version that we used previously. And I love the look of this board. It's got such a modern, clean, clear aesthetic that I think it's very sympathetic to the mod that I want to do here. Additionally, I should be able to make changes to it fairly easily, because everything can be removed from the motherboard quite simply. In fact, it actually comes disassembled. You have two boxes on the inside where one of them has the water block and the other one has the PCB, and so you can quite easily take things on and off and swap it around if you want. Similarly, we're going to need a proper GPU for this system, so we've got the 2080 Super Waterforce Xtreme, which should match up rather nicely with this board. Now, I've used the 2080 Ti version of this before, so I know a few things that you can do to make it look really special, and I think it's going to be quite easy to work with. Similarly, Intel has also stepped in with some proper kit with the 10900K CPU. Now, that's going to add plenty of speed for this bad boy and be rather appropriate, I think, to the system as a whole, which is a pretty high spec machine. Now, obviously these aren't the only components that we need for a full-on rig, so AORUS has also provided a P850W power supply that's going to be powering the whole rig. And we've got an interesting one here, because this is a 64 gigabyte kit of memory. There's only 2 sticks in here, so 2 by 32 gigs. That's pretty interesting. So this is from the Designare series. This is more like the workstation type stuff that they've gone with. So I might have to mod that to make it fit my intended scheme of things, but it's kind of cool. I've not really dealt with a massive high capacity consumer kit like that before, so that should be pretty interesting. Additionally, we've got some storage as well, and that's going to be from this 1 terabyte NVMe drive. Keeping things nice and simple. We don't want any kind of wires straggling around ruining things. No, we want it nice and on the board where possible. Just makes sense, keeps it nice and clean. Now, we're also going to be having a lot of water cooling going into this build, which is going to be provided by Corsair, but since we're very much early in the planning phase at the moment, I don't actually know what I'm going to need yet, so we're going to figure that one out when we get a bit closer, and then when it turns up, I'll be able to guide you through it and show what we've chosen. But either way, I think it's going to be pretty cool. The question is though, what am I going to try doing with this one? Now, you're going to have to bear with me a bit on this one, because we are so very early in the design process here that I haven't got anything drawn out in 3D yet. In fact, I've barely got anything in 2D either, and what I do have is such a sort of a scribble and covered in notes and rubbish that it would just make it more confusing if I showed you. So what we'll do is we'll get to that bit later. For now though, I'm going to try my best at describing what I want to achieve with this one. Now, starting off with the name, Ensis is not an accident or just some random word plucked out of nowhere. So if any of you studied Latin, for instance, you may know that Ensis is one of the words used for sword. So why have I chosen sword? What's that got to do with it? Well, I want to try and play off the angles found on the motherboard and the GPU, because I think that's a really interesting theme, especially since there's a whole lot of metal present there. And same thing when you add all of the black and different color contrast parts to it. I think there's a lot of potential for something really interesting and very modern out of that. So this is going to be radically different to the look that I've chosen for AORUS, which is quite sort of a combination of skeletal modern, but also very much sort of a classical theme with the wood. This is going to be ultra modern. There's going to be lights, there's going to be high contrast, there's going to be angles and sharp lines, so it should be pretty interesting. So to that extent, what am I going to be trying out? Well, I've got this big old piece of aluminium that we started with in another episode, and I want to try using this again for parts of the structure. And specifically, I want to be able to have a structure where these panels are sort of held at angles like this. Now, one of the influences for this one was actually InWin's Z Tower. Now, I don't have the ability to make a Z Tower whatsoever in this workshop. It's such a crazy piece of case manufacturing and engineering that it's just way above what I could do, and I haven't modded one for largely the same reason. I don't know what I'd do with it. However, I love the concept of something that kind of wraps around the hardware. And instead of maybe making it all encompassing and wrapping around, what I'm going to try doing is making a series of angular panels that sort of resemble blades. Now, what I'm going to do with these blades is up for debate at the moment because I have a few ideas. So one thing I was thinking about was using aluminium paneling in parts that could then be painted either black or white, depending on which one works out more interestingly. And then I can do details on top of that, such as edge chamfers that bring out the brightness. I can then add frosted acrylic into, so make it sort of like a sandwich structure and put LEDs in that, and then you could have sort of pulsing lights running up the edges of these panels, and these will sort of look like big angular pieces that sort of jut out at sort of 60 degrees, I guess. You have the motherboard at an angle with the GPU on a riser cable in front of that, and then that puts it right at the forefront. You can have the radiators attached at angles as well, kind of like moving around. The cables will then loop in between everything, and the use of distro plates hopefully should make it rather exciting as well. There's potential also to use my special distro connectors if it feels appropriate. If not, then I can stick to tubes. It's about using the right thing for the right scenario, so that's going to be quite interesting. Now, this isn't going to be a small mod either. There's a lot of high-end hardware and big beefy stuff going in there, so it's probably going to end up pretty large. So my anticipation is maybe I could have, say, two 360mm radiators again, or maybe a 360-240, maybe a longer one. I'll have to see how the dimensions sort of play with one another. But I'm envisioning it to be quite hefty, so much like how the Z Tower is a bit of a unit, this one will probably end up being pretty big as well. But it should be exciting, and I want to see how it's going to evolve throughout the build process, because I want to try and document it in the same way that I've done with AORUS. So we're going to try and put out parts as often as progress is made. The idea being every week or two something comes out and we can experiment and see exactly how it's evolving. To that effect, I'd also be interested in getting feedback on some of these bits, because I'd like to know what your thoughts are on maybe making the rig white, orange, silver, that sort of thing, which is similar to what I've done before, but I haven't done like a dedicated white build. And I've also not really done a black themed build, again with those sort of highlights for the branding purposes. It could be quite interesting, and I'd like to know in the comments what you think would be more interesting, when I can try playing around and seeing if different ideas work out better one way or the other, because this memory has actually given me quite a few ideas, because there aren't many of these Z490s floating around, and there are going to be even fewer ones out there that have been modded. So the potential of doing a fully like maybe white cover on the parts instead of using the black theme that's already on the motherboard, no, that could be quite exciting and a little bit different and a little bit daring as well, if I say. So maybe we'll have a look at that and see how it goes. Whilst you're here, I thought I'd also update you on some of the cool behind the scenes stuff that's been going on over the last few weeks, namely to do with live streaming. So I did mention that I wanted to get into it, and to that extent I wrote off to Corsair, who've now provided a bunch of Elgato goodies that can help me along. So I'm hoping I'll be able to get that up and running for this build, and we can get some proper live streaming action of maybe some of the CAM processes before I do the machining. And I think that should be pretty exciting, because actually a lot of those questions are pretty difficult to answer in a preset video, because many of them are very, very specific. So I'm hoping that will add that sort of back and forth that can really kind of help engage with this particular project and show some of the other work that goes on behind the scenes that often doesn't get documented. Now, I'm going to make sure that I let everyone know via the community tab when the streams start going up. I still have a few more things that I need to sort out with my camera and whatnot, but when they do, I'll let everyone know over there, and then hopefully you'll be able to tune in and see it, and if not, there will be recordings so you can check them out later on as well. Now, The best way to stay up to date with everything, of course, with the channel is by subscribing if you haven't already. So make sure you do that, and also you can find us over on Instagram, Facebook, builds.gg, Twitter, and of course our Discord server, which is linked below. And if you'd like to support the channel, make sure to stop over our merchandise store, also linked below, and see if anything strikes your fancy. Take care, folks, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.